I'm Lucas Harrington, and at 51 years old, I've poured the last 15 years of my life into building the forecasting engine at Hawthorne Logistics, a family-run distribution center on the outskirts of Madison, Wisconsin. When Ms. Evelyn Carter from Human Resources ushered me into the glass-walled conference room that morning, the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the dry chill of air conditioning, a strangely comforting combination I'd come to associate with early morning strategy sessions. Instead, today's purpose was far less strategic and far more abrupt. She sat behind a spotless table, her hands folded neatly atop a manila folder. Her gaze avoided mine as she slid the papers forward, her voice low and steady. "Lucas, we're eliminating your position as part of a company restructuring. This takes effect immediately." Behind her, through the tinted glass, I could see the warehouse floor where my algorithms had kept every shelf balanced, every pallet in the right place at exactly the right moment, for 3 recessions and countless market swings. That orchestration was ending now. Without hesitation, I nodded. I'd rehearsed anger, pleading, even shock in private, but none felt honest. Instead, I managed one calm question. Who will assume these forecasting duties? Ms. Carter looked surprised by my composure. She took a breath. We're transitioning those responsibilities to our new Vice President of Operations, Bryce Langford. I recognized the name. Bryce, 35 with an MBA from Stanford, a consultant turned executive, flown in by our parent company 8 months ago. He'd been circulating through my department, asking pointed technical questions and dismissing our decades-old techniques as antiquated. She placed a thick envelope before me. 3 months of salary, continued benefits. I signed without reading the fine print, his signature already smudged from the pen's oil. Standing up, I swept the papers into my jacket, then walked back through the corridor to my office. As I passed Bryce Langford's temporary workstation, I saw him hunched over a laptop, flanked by printouts of the very quarterly reports I'd crafted. My data. My models. He glanced up, offering a polite nod, as if acknowledging a fellow professional rather than the architect whose system he'd been dismantling. By mid-afternoon, I was carefully packing my few personal items into a single cardboard box. A chipped coffee mug, hand-painted by my daughter Emily. A framed photograph of my late wife Isabel smiling in a garden she loved, and a small jade plant that had stubbornly thrived on my dusty windowsill for 8 years. The rest, every spreadsheet, every line of code, belonged to Hawthorne. I taped the box closed, shouldered it, and walked through the parking lot toward my car. Marcus Flynn, the security guard who'd known me since my first day fresh out of college, raised a hand in farewell. His uniform was creased, but his eyes glistened with genuine regret. "Take care, Lucas," he called. "We'll miss you." I nodded and forced a smile. "Thank you, Marcus. I will." Back home, the silence felt unfamiliar. I'd landed at Hawthorne straight out of the University of Wisconsin's supply chain program, hired by George Whitman, the old-school forecasting manager who still trusted gut instinct more than data. Under his mentorship, I spent evenings layering together spreadsheets that tracked not just sales, but weather patterns, economic indicators, competitor pricing, and regional demographic shifts. George had scoffed at first, but when dead stock fell by 20% in my pilot quarter, then inventory turnover jumped 30% in my first full year, even he couldn't deny the results. When the 2008 downturn hit and Hawthorne stayed in the black, I became known as the man with the crystal-clear forecasts. My wife, Isabel, was my greatest champion. She'd patiently listened to long explanations about how pollen counts in April could predict demand for allergy-soothing home goods, or how gas prices influenced purchases of lawnmowers. She used to joke that I was her crystal ball husband. Then, 4 years ago, cancer stole her from me. After the funeral, work became my anchor. Numbers never lied, or abandoned you. Over the years, I mentored 3 junior analysts. 2 remained good friends who still called for advice. The third now headed forecasting at a rival distributor. 8 months ago, Hawthorne was acquired by Summit Core Holdings, which promised growth and synergy opportunities. Instead, they brought in teams of consultants who'd never stepped inside a warehouse, but spoke confidently about streamlining best practices. Bryce Langford was one of those hired from within Summit Core. In my first meeting with him, scanning my multivariable models, he raised an eyebrow. Are we certain this level of granularity is necessary? Most platforms today rely on simpler, more automated forecasting. I explained that tracking 17 variables allowed us to predict market shifts 3 months in advance. Precision that had saved millions. He smiled politely, tapped his tablet, and scribbled notes. 2 weeks later, the axe fell. I'd ignored the warning signs, just as I'd ignored Isabel's first complaints of fatigue, because some patterns I was better at spotting than others. My phone rang on a Thursday evening in March, exactly 6 months after I'd walked out of Hawthorne's front doors. "Lucas, this is Henry Caldwell," said the deep, familiar voice of Hawthorne's CEO. In 15 years, he'd phoned me only 3 times, during crisis controls that my forecasts had averted, and once to congratulate me on record-low inventory variance. "I need you to be completely honest with me," he continued, tension threading his words. "Did you prepare forecasting models for April through September before you left?" I leaned back in my home office chair, eyes drifting to the spreadsheet-covered wall behind me. Of course I had. I always worked 2 quarters ahead. "Yes, Henry. I completed the preliminary forecasts through October and saved them on the shared drive." Silence crackled over the line. "That's what I feared," he said finally. "We're sitting on nearly $4 million of unsellable inventory. Outdoor furniture, garden supplies, seasonal sporting goods. Bryce tripled our normal orders. I don't understand how he missed your guidance." My stomach clenched. I'd predicted a 15% decrease in outdoor furniture sales due to economic headwinds and shifting consumer preferences, recommending a 20% reduction in seasonal orders. Instead, Bryce had insisted on a massive ramp-up, citing post-pandemic lifestyle trends he'd gleaned from social media analytics. I waited as Henry gathered his thoughts. "Do you still have copies of those forecasts?" he asked. I did, on my personal laptop, untouched since my departure. "Yes, I have them. I can send everything." 15 years of refined algorithms, weather correlation matrices, economic indicator models, regional demographic analyses, and competitor movement algorithms. I'd assembled it all as a testament to what had worked. Over the next 3 hours, I recreated the full forecasting package. Not just the numbers, but the methodology, the code comments, the explanation of why we tracked each variable. At 4:17 p.m., I hit send on an email to Henry. Subject: Forecast Models and Trend Analyses, April-October. Body: Henry. Attached are the forecasting models I completed in February, 2 weeks before my departure. Recommendations include a 20% reduction in seasonal outdoor inventory due to projected economic headwinds and shifting consumer spending patterns. Please let me know if you need further clarification. Best regards, Lucas Harrington. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat in silence. My phone buzzed at 6:22 p.m. "Lucas, I've been reviewing your forecast for 2 hours." Henry's voice was tight. It predicted exactly what's happened, right down to product categories and regional differences. "How did Bryce overlook this?" He paused. "It confirmed that the directory was never removed. Bryce had full access, but chose to ignore your recommendations." I closed my eyes, picturing the screen where Bryce had scrolled past my notes on risk calibration and conservative ordering. There was another long pause. "I'm looking at an April spreadsheet Bryce created," Henry continued. He projected a 40% surge in outdoor furniture demand based on social media sentiment scores and lifestyle optimization data. Did you ever experiment with social media metrics? I answered quietly. I did test them, but found them too volatile and demographic specific to reliably predict wholesale demand. Social media chatter doesn't translate directly to purchasing behavior at the retail level. He sighed heavily. That's exactly what your methodology notes say. Bryce simply didn't read them. I let the silence stretch, thinking of those pristine graph lines I'd left behind. Henry, what's our current situation? I asked. Warehouses in 3 states overflowing with unsellable inventory. Outdoor tables we predicted would underperform. Garden supplies now out of season. Sporting goods for activities nobody's undertaking anymore. His voice tightened. Bryce is scrambling to find. And just like that, our conversation ended on that unfinished thought. I sat at my desk long after the call dropped, the late-day light casting long shadows across my drafts and diagrams. The numbers were still there, waiting for someone to read them. And as the sun set on that day, I realized that sometimes the clearest vision comes long after you've walked away from the ship. Lucas Harrington reclined in his study chair, listening to Henry Caldwell's voice crackle through the speakerphone. We've shifted excess stock to discount outlets, Henry said, his tone heavy with frustration. But we're still staring at catastrophic losses. The afternoon light through Lucas's home office window slanted across his desk, illuminating the framed photograph of his late wife and the jade plant that stubbornly thrived in its ceramic pot. What about Bryce? Lucas asked quietly. Henry sighed. Bryce Langford is still adamant that his projections were sound, that the market simply moved in unpredictable ways. He's blaming external factors, asking for more time to implement what he calls corrective strategies. A bitter half-smile tugged at Lucas's lips. Bryce doubling down rather than owning his error was all too familiar. Behavior Lucas had seen before in consultants who valued ego over accuracy. Lucas, Henry continued, there's something else. The board wants you to come in and present your forecasting methodology. They need to understand how we ended up here and how to prevent a repeat. Lucas's heart thumped. He had addressed the board only once before, during a quarterly review 3 years ago, and the memory of that distant, polite applause felt stale now. Monday at 9 a.m., Henry said. I know it's short notice, but investors are demanding answers. Lucas glanced around his cramped home office, where charts and spreadsheets from his freelance work jostled for space. The regional project could wait. This was bigger. Not merely vindication. This was accountability for the arrogance that had dismissed 15 years of proven expertise. I'll be there, Lucas said firmly. I'll bring everything. The models, the data, the documentation. The board needs the full picture of what we lost when they let me go. Henry's relief was palpable. Thank you, Lucas. I'll see you Monday. The call ended, and Lucas sat in silence, the weight of the upcoming battle settling over him. He spent the weekend not only refining his slides, but digging deeper into what had transpired at Hawthorne Logistics in his absence. Old contacts, whispered truths Henry had never mentioned. On Saturday morning, his former assistant, Emma Price, met him at a corner cafe. Emma had worked directly under Lucas for 3 years before the restructuring reassigned her to accounting. Lucas greeted her at the small table by the window. Emma looked haggard, her navy blazer slightly rumpled, but her eyes shone with conviction. Lucas, she said, stirring her latte, sugar crystals tinkling against the cup. I tried to warn them. He leaned forward. Warn them about what? When Bryce started placing those massive orders, Emma explained, I pulled up your February forecasts and showed them to my supervisor. I told him you'd predicted the exact opposite trend. Lucas's stomach tightened. And? Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. Bryce found out I was questioning his methods. They called me into HR, accused me of undermining departmental unity and failing to support new leadership. I almost got written up. She glanced around the cafe before pulling out her smartphone. But that's not the worst part. Lucas's pulse quickened. What happened? Bryce didn't just ignore your forecasts. He actively suppressed them. Emma tapped the screen. Last month, when your shared drive directory became redundant, they deleted all your files, but I saved copies of the key spreadsheets. On her screen scrolled email chains from April and May. Subjects: inventory concerns, Scottsdale facility, forecasting questions. Each message from warehouse managers raising legitimate alarms met only with bureaucratic rebuffs. One message from Carlos Rivera, manager of the Scottsdale Distribution Center, caught Lucas's eye. Subject: outdoor furniture inventory at 340% of normal. We should be reducing orders, not increasing them. Please clarify the new forecasting methodology. Emma showed him Bryce's response. Current projections rely on advanced analytics not available in prior systems. Operational concerns should be routed through proper channels, not by questioning procurement strategy. Lucas pressed his palm to his forehead. Do you know if Henry Caldwell saw any of these emails? Emma shook her head. I don't think so. Bryce was reporting directly to the executive team, providing only summary slides. Lucas exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The board presentation was no longer just about theoretical accuracy. It was evidence of systematic information suppression. Emma, would you provide these emails to Henry and the board? She nodded, sliding printed copies across the table. I had them printed the day before they purged the drive. I hoped someone would ask. Lucas tucked the documents into his briefcase. Thank you. You've done more than you know. On Sunday evening, his phone buzzed again. It was Carlos Rivera. Lucas, heard you're presenting tomorrow. We warehouse managers have been documenting the chaos since March. Photos, shipping records, storage reports. Lucas sank into his chair, relief and anticipation mixing in his chest. How did you hear about the board meeting? Carlos chuckled. Word gets around when $4 million of unsellable outdoor sets pile up in warehouses. Listen, we always trusted your forecasts. We tried raising flags, but Bryce shut us down. He described how managers in Scottsdale, Boulder, and Nashville had kept informal logs, overcrowded aisles, shipping containers idle in loading bays, customer complaints about missing electronics, and home improvement supplies. So you have both surplus and shortages? Lucas asked. Exactly, Carlos confirmed. Too much of what nobody wants, and not enough of what they do. Major retailers are already threatening to switch distributors. Lucas scribbled notes as Carlos spoke, realizing the true operational fallout. Not just lost profits, but shattered client relationships. Tony, sorry, Carlos. Would you and the others present directly to the board? We've assembled everything, he replied. They just need to listen. Monday dawned gray and cold. Lucas donned his charcoal suit, the same one he'd worn to Isabel's funeral, and drove to Hawthorne Logistics headquarters for the first time in 6 months. The building's glass facade gleamed, but the air felt charged with tension. In the lobby, Henry Caldwell greeted him at the entrance, offering a firm handshake. Good morning, Lucas, Henry said. Before we head up, Bryce insisted on attending. He'll present his perspective alongside yours. Lucas nodded. He'd expected as much. That's fair. The board should hear both sides. Henry led him to the elevator, and as they ascended, Lucas reviewed his opening remarks in his mind. Stepping into the boardroom, Lucas saw 8 figures around the polished mahogany table. 7 board members, and Bryce Langford, seated with a confident poise. Granite stone coasters held water glasses, and muted sunlight filtered through motorized shades. At the head sat Chairman James Thornton, a stoic man whose steely gaze made Lucas's pulse quicken. To Thornton's right, Caroline Pearson, the board's head of operations, reviewed a tablet screen. Others scribbled notes or tapped pens. Henry introduced them. "Lucas, thank you for coming on such short notice. Bryce will present first, then we'll hear from you," followed by input from our warehouse managers dialing in remotely. Bryce stood, his tailored navy blazer crisp, his Yale MBA bearing evident in his poised delivery. "Good morning, everyone," he began, projecting confidence. "I'll start by outlining the rationale behind our second quarter and third quarter procurement strategy." He flicked through slides of social media sentiment analyses, lifestyle optimization graphs, and AI-driven demand forecasts. His tone remained calm, asserting that historical methods were outdated and incapable of capturing emerging consumer patterns. When Bryce concluded, Lucas set up his laptop and took a steadying breath. The projection screen lit up with the title, "Forecasting Methodology, a 15-year proven framework." "Good morning," Lucas began, his voice measured. "Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to walk you through the core principles of the forecasting engine I developed at Hawthorne Logistics from 2008 through 2023. He clicked to the first slide, a multivariable model tracking sales, weather data, economic indicators, competitor pricing, and regional demographics. These variables allowed us to anticipate market shifts 3 months in advance, he explained. In 2008, as competitors liquidated inventory at steep losses, our model predicted a downturn in discretionary outdoor spending, enabling us to reduce orders by 25% and maintain profitability. In 2015, and again in 2019, similar patterns emerged, and Hawthorne outperformed every regional peer. Next, he displayed a side-by-side comparison, his February 2025 forecasts versus Bryce's actual purchase orders. The contrast was stark. A 15% predicted decline in outdoor furniture demand became a 200% inventory surge. A 30% forecast rise in home electronics was completely ignored. The board members' eyes widened as Lucas navigated through the slides. "I'll now share field evidence," Lucas continued, clicking to a series of photographs sourced from Scottsdale, Boulder, and Nashville facilities. Overstuffed pallets blocked aisles, shipping containers lay dormant, customer orders for flashlights, power drills, and LED light fixtures couldn't be fulfilled because inventory was tied up in unsold Adirondack chairs and patio sets. Caroline Pearson leaned forward. "Lucas, did you review these images prior to your departure?" "I did," he replied, "and I warned the appropriate channels, but those warnings were suppressed." He opened a slide containing Emma Price's email screenshots. Subject lines clearly flagged inventory concerns and operational queries, and Bryce's dismissive replies accompanied them. This demonstrates not just flawed forecasting, but deliberate obstruction of operational feedback. Henry initiated the conference call, and several warehouse managers appeared on screen, including Carlos Rivera, who spoke with quiet authority. Over the next 10 minutes, they presented shipping manifests, storage capacity reports, and excerpts from supplier complaints, unambiguous proof that both surplus and shortages plagued Hawthorne's distribution network. When Carlos finished, the room fell silent, Thornton's dark eyes fixed on Bryce. "Mr. Langford, can you respond to this operational testimony?" Bryce swallowed, smooth veneer slipping. "These are temporary market anomalies," he began. "No model, no matter how sophisticated, can account for unprecedented social media-driven demand. I stand by my projections." Lucas clicked to his final slide, a chart overlaying his forecasted profit trajectory against actual results. With a 20% inventory reduction in outdoor goods and reallocation toward electronics, Hawthorne would have realized an additional $1.2 million in profit over the past 6 months, rather than incurring $4 million in unsellable stock. Chairman Thornton raised a hand. "Thank you, Lucas. We've heard enough." He turned to Bryce. "Please step outside." As Bryce rose, confusion flickered across his face. Lucas closed his laptop and straightened his jacket, the soft click echoing through the room. He met Henry's eye, a silent acknowledgement that not only had he been right, but that Hawthorne's future now depended on heeding expertise instead of chasing untested trends. Bryce Langford stood, gathered his notes and files with a look of tight-lipped composure, then slipped silently from the boardroom, closing the heavy door behind him. A hush fell over the assembled directors as the click of that latch echoed through the polished walnut walls. Chairman James Thornton folded his hands on the tabletop, eyes flicking from one expectant face to another. The tension was almost palpable, a mixture of vindication, relief, and the lingering sting of betrayal. After a brief pause, Thornton cleared his throat and spoke in measured tones. "The board has reached a unanimous decision." Without hesitation, Thornton continued. "Effective immediately, Bryce Langford's employment is terminated. Furthermore, Mr. Caldwell will explore all legal avenues to recover the losses incurred due to willful disregard of our established forecasting protocols." A murmur rippled around the table as directors exchanged nods of agreement. Each board member, from operations to finance, seemed to share an unspoken acknowledgement that expertise and institutional memory had finally prevailed over untested trends and overconfidence. Then Thornton's gaze settled on me. "Mr. Harrington," he said, "we would like to offer you the role of Vice President of Operations, with full authority over all forecasting and inventory management functions." His voice carried both gravity and warmth. I felt my chest tighten as I absorbed the weight of his words, the culmination of 15 years' work and the promise of new beginnings. Around me, faces I had rarely seen focused intently on my reaction. The stern countenance of Deborah Sinclair from finance, the quiet encouragement in Caroline Pearson's eyes, the subtle nod of Michael Alvarez from compliance. I swallowed, steadying myself against the wave of emotion rising in my throat. "Chairman Thornton, I am honored by the offer," I replied, my voice steady despite the lurch in my heart. "I will need a brief period to consider the responsibilities and implications of such a position." Thornton inclined his head graciously. "Of course. Take the time you need. We understand the importance of this decision." Relief and anticipation mingled within me. Every fiber of my professional identity and personal passion pulsed at the prospect of shaping the company's future. As the meeting adjourned, Henry Caldwell rose and approached me in the hallway. His normally composed features bore a rare, genuine smile. "Lucas," he said quietly, "letting you go was the greatest mistake this company has made in 2 decades. His words, simple but sincere, resonated more powerfully than any formal apology. I managed a nod, the familiar pang of regret mingling with cautious optimism. Caldwell clasped my shoulder. "Take the weekend. We'll reconvene Monday morning for your decision." I walked through the echoing corridors to the parking garage, each step weighted by memories. Late nights at the forecasting terminal, strategy sessions with the team, the camaraderie of shared successes and crises averted. Climbing into my pickup, I navigated the busy streets of Madison, Wisconsin, the afternoon sun glinting off storefronts and autumn leaves drifting along the pavement. My mind raced with possibilities, restoring the robust forecasting engine, rebuilding trust with operations staff, ensuring no future board would overlook the value of nuanced, data-driven insight. That weekend was a whirlwind of reflection. I reviewed the boardroom presentations in my mind, considered the structural changes required, and weighed the personal sacrifices that an executive seat would demand. Memories of Isabel, Her quiet pride in my work, her gentle encouragement when I doubted myself, flickered through my thoughts, reminding me that expertise was not just numbers and models, but a promise to those who trusted me. On Monday morning, I telephoned Chairman Thornton with my decision. "I accept," I said, feeling a wave of resolve wash over me. "I am ready to assume the responsibilities of Vice President of Operations, to safeguard the forecasting methodology, and to rebuild the communication structures that were lost." Thornton's relief was palpable. "Welcome back, Lucas," he replied. "We couldn't be more delighted." That afternoon, I met with Caldwell to begin the transition. First on my agenda was the full restoration of the comprehensive forecasting framework I'd spent a decade and a half refining. The multivariable models integrating sales history, weather data, economic indicators, demographic shifts, and competitor actions. No longer would these critical files languish on a shared drive or be summarily deleted by misguided directives. Next, we designed a mandatory, multi-tiered review process. Every quarterly forecast would undergo cross-functional vetting by operations, finance, and warehouse management before board submission. Any dissenting analyses would be recorded in an executive forecast review log, ensuring that alternative perspectives could not be suppressed. This protocol instituted transparency and accountability, protecting the company from the perils of groupthink and unilateral decision-making. I appointed Emma Price, my former assistant and unwavering ally, as Assistant Vice President of Forecasting. Emma's analytical acumen and institutional loyalty made her the perfect partner in rebuilding our forecasting division. For warehouse leadership, Carlos Rivera was elevated to Director of Warehouse Operations. His first-hand knowledge of storage capacities and regional logistics would bridge the gap between theory and practice. Together, we convened daily stand-ups via video conference, reinstating open feedback channels that Bryce had systematically dismantled. We tackled the $4 million inventory debacle head-on, offloading mountains of unsellable outdoor furniture at discount outlets and clearance sales yielded only 40% of cost, but the financial write-down cleared warehouse space and restored operational cash flow. Each pallet moved was a reminder of the consequences of ignoring proven models, but also a testament to resilience and decisive leadership. Meanwhile, Bryce Langford resurfaced in Chicago with a consulting firm that touted his cutting-edge analytics. I learned of his new role only through industry whispers. There was no satisfaction in hearing his name on a recruiting email or a LinkedIn update. My focus remained on our company's recovery and future. Expertise, I reminded myself, cannot truly be replaced by flash-in-the-pan theories. On my office desk, I kept the first email Henry ever sent me, his urgent request for April-October forecasts, now preserved not as a trophy of vindication, but as a reminder. Numbers speak louder than words, and data framed by experience is the bedrock of sound decision-making. Each morning, I glanced at that message before reviewing daily sales reports and adjusting projections. It grounded me in a philosophy that expertise must be honored, not sidelined. Under the new regime, Hawthorne logistics began to flourish once again. Inventory turnover rebounded, customer satisfaction improved, and key retail partners reinstated long-term contracts they had once threatened to cancel. The restored forecasting framework not only prevented future overstocking, but also capitalized on emerging trends, predicting surges in home office equipment and eco-friendly packaging demands. As the leaves turned to winter's pale hues, I found myself in a familiar conference room, leading a quarterly forecast review that included every department, from finance to field operations. No longer did the models exist in a silo. They formed the connective tissue between strategy, execution, and accountability. My colleagues contributed insights with confidence, secure in the knowledge that their expertise would be valued rather than quashed. Looking back on that decisive board meeting, I realized that the greatest lesson was not about being right, but about resilience, collaboration, and the courage to defend what works. Expertise must be protected through process and culture. Experience must be viewed as an asset, not an obstacle to innovation. Sometimes the clearest voices are numbers, and the most persuasive arguments are spreadsheets annotated with 15 years of careful evolution. And so, as I settled into my new office, walls lined with charts and code comments, I felt an abiding sense of purpose, to ensure that never again would proven insight be cast aside in favor of untested assumptions.